Okay, good afternoon, Wisconsin. My name is Lester Brooks. I teach in the history department at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
My name is Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent attorney from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I'm Tim Moore from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution at the University of Wisconsin. How many Metesky views do we need here?
Okay, introduce yourselves.
Well, good morning and good afternoon. We are Unit 2 from Wauwatosa West High School, representing Unit 2. I am Nora Rommelfanger.
I am Rachel Lavelle.
I'm Mackenzie Jacoby.
And I'm Nora Ingring.
And we are here on behalf of our mentors, teachers' assistants, and teacher, Mr. Chad Metesky.
Okay, ready to get down to work. Let's go for Unit 2, question number 2. One founder claimed that representatives should, quote, refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country, end quote. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? You may begin.
To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea, stated James Madison at the Virginia Ratifying Convention of 1788. Virtue is the foundation of any functional government because it allows for emphasis on the common good and protection of natural rights. These key philosophies were held by the founders of the Constitution. To ensure the most virtuous candidates were chosen, they included a mix of delegates and trustees to best represent the people.
The founders worried that the people would not be educated enough to make informed government decisions, therefore including safeguards on democracy within the Constitution. Our panel agrees with James Madison's view of representation to a certain extent, although a balance between delegates and trustees is best. We identify a trustee as an official who acts on their own best judgment, while a delegate acts directly on the desires of their constituents. Nathaniel Barrow, a Massachusetts delegate to the Constitutional Convention, voted to ratify the Constitution despite explicit instructions from his legislature to vote against it.
Whatever the positive effects of this action, Barrow went against the interests of those he was supposed to represent and therefore acted inappropriately as a delegate. However, sometimes it is not appropriate to have delegates, particularly when the public is not well educated on a certain topic. The Supreme Court is an example of this trustee form of representation. The president nominates these officials to assert independence from the legislative authority. To ensure virtue is upheld in decision-making, a blend of delegates and trustees is necessary. However, if representatives do not prioritize the interests of the people, the government can fall into the power of selfish factions.
Prior to the drafting of the Constitution, many were concerned with the science of politics. The delegates convention knew unifying the nation would need to allow for a balance of power between levels of government. They had felt the tyrannical effects of a monarchy under Great Britain, so the New York Plan, which would have established a monarchical government, was rejected. Another proposal from John Rutledge of South Carolina based representation on states' wealth, an idea that worried smaller states.
However, the New Jersey plan's equal representation was not approved by large states. With knowledge of the republics in ancient Rome, this plan was seen as unsuitable for a large country. Contrarily, the Virginia plan most closely followed the ancient Greek philosophy of a direct democracy. To ensure the new government was sustainable, the philosophy of civic virtue was combined with some of the ideas of the Roman government, thus forming a federal democratic republic.
Although the United States has the oldest national written constitution, there are a variety of other successful governments in the 21st century. The Lebanese government has quotas for representatives based on religious affiliation to ensure no religious group is overlooked. The European Union houses its 7 institutions of government in different countries, allowing for closer representatives to the people.
In modern America, the House of Representatives must expand to properly represent population growth following the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929. Additionally, the United States should consider reworking the polarized two-party system to help cater to a multi-party system. This would allow for American public to better vote for representatives that match their views and help to discourage political apathy. Similarly, giving Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories a vote in the House of Representatives would more accurately represent the jurisdictional control of the United States.
Although the Constitution does not allow for a pure democracy, the power still ultimately rests with the people, as they are the fountain of all authority. Citizens join a social contract trusting that their representatives will make decisions to protect natural rights and defend the common good. Virtue crumbles when that trust is broken. In order to ensure that virtue prevails, the people can take action like voting or calling for impeachment. Therefore, it is essential for the people to remain virtuous and educated because they are the ultimate check on the government. Thank you. This concludes our statement, and we are now ready for your follow-up questions.
Thank you. Okay, judges, follow-up questions. Tim?
All right, I'll start out. Give me, the Anti-Federalists, they took exception to this representational system. What were some of their critiques of Madison's filtering system?
Anti-Federalists were big advocates for a more proportional distribution system, especially those from smaller states. And we can see this in the instructions from states like Virginia and Massachusetts, which explicitly told their representatives not to vote or not to change the form of government. However, some of them had to switch their viewpoints when it came to the times of the ratifying conventions, such as Melancton Smith, who was known as a ratifying anti, and actually switched his viewpoint in order to sign the Constitution, and thus sacrificed his political career over.
Okay, excellent, Norma. But Nora, I want to know the exact critiques of the House that the Anti-Federalists had.
They greatly align themselves with Montesquieu's idea of small homogeneous communities, and this is why they preferred the Articles of Confederation's approach to representation, being that the states would have the most power because it would be closest to the people.
The Anti-Federalists wanted the government to remain as close to the people as possible, so they therefore liked the New Jersey plan more than the Virginia plan, and the New Jersey plan had equal representation, while the Virginia plan eventually combined both through the Great Compromise.
Okay, Susan?
Okay. You mentioned in your talk about having multi-party system. Were you proposing that for the United States? And if so, how would you go about that?
We could go about allowing a multi-party system to work for the United States by limiting campaign finance. According to Forbes, President Donald Trump spent $1.9 billion on his campaign in 2020. This unproportionately does not allow for a multi-party system to happen in the United States. Or to limit campaign finance would allow for this to happen.
As Duverger's law shows us, with single ballots and single member districts, there's bound to be primarily two parties that will surface. And we can combat this by repealing the single member district mandate, also known as US Code Section 2, which would promote more of a multi-party system approach.
This would help to make more proportional distribution within the districts that elect the Electoral College, and with the Electoral College allowing for more different parties to be seen, there would be more parties prevalent in the United States.
Although this would be more of a foundational change, switching to a parliamentary system in the United States, which the founders were extremely wary of. However, this would lead to more of a multi-party system. However, it could be seen that coalitions would form and thus rendering it useless.
Let me jump in here and ask this question. Let's say you have concerns that are not being met by Congress. Let's say you're part of a group and your concerns are not being met. Where do you go from there?
I believe that misrepresentation is first found at the local level. And so I feel in order for those who feel they aren't properly represented, they must go to their local governments. And we can see this through our very own school board, which has student representatives. And when making large decisions to affect the community, they heard over 4 hours of community input. And so if the people feel they're not properly being represented, they have to work their way from the bottom upwards.
Okay.
The people can unelect or not re-elect the candidate that they feel is not representing them in the next election.
This idea gets into the foundation of some of our systems within our country, as only 1 in 4 Americans actually know all 3 branches of the government, according to the Annenberg Center. So by educating the people, such as classes like We the People, they will be better able to align themselves with different parties and push for through voting their ideas.
John Locke's social contract theory demonstrates that we give our consent to be governed and thus give the power to the governing in order to make these policies. So when a sort of group is not being represented or they're being misrepresented, they can disengage from this social contract theory by breaking the law, which we can see in civil disobedience in the civil rights movement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to return to the 18th century. Why is Madison so, what's wrong with local representation that drove Madison to this idea of filtering?
We can see under the Articles of Confederation, there were many defects. For example, they could not raise taxes. They could only ask the federal government for money, and many states decided that they would not want to give back the money that they owed to the federal government, which eventually led to Shays' Rebellion.
One problem with local representation that Madison experienced directly himself, as Dr. Kaminsky from the Center for the American Constitution from UW-Madison, as he named it, Henrymandering instead of gerrymandering. Madison was subject to this gerrymandering in his attempt to get into the House, and he was eventually able to get in.
While Madison's concerns were legitimate, local governments can also serve as laboratories of democracy, which we can see in Wyoming's giving the woman the right to vote, which later led to the 19th Amendment being ratified.
Nora, you wanted in on that or not?
I was just going to discuss how the United States at the time was an extremely fragile country, and Madison was wary that only having local governments, although they might be strong themselves, would not allow for the United States to grow economically, and it could easily be picked off by other countries, thus kind of resulting in their fight for independence for nothing.
Thank you.
You mentioned that Lebanon is one of the countries that has a quota system. Has that worked well for Lebanon, and do you think we should institute it?
It has worked well for Lebanon because they have such a religious culture ingrained in their society, and this would not be successful in our government because it would violate our First Amendment right of freedom of religion.
Furthermore, when we remove quotas from religious things, it does not work because all groups of minorities found in the United States are not the same. This can be seen by the campaign Queers Against Pete, which was a petition that to not allow Pete Buttigieg to run for office from the LGBTQ plus community because they did not agree with his ideas of normalization versus liberation for the queer community.
Over 90% of the Lebanese population is religious, while only 47%, according to the US Census, stated that they still go to church. So it works very well in that country because they are more of a small, almost homogenous community when compared to the US.
However, we can see with Rwanda's quotas that they've established within their 2003 constitution that establishes quotas based on sex rather than religion. This could be completely constitutional, and this would be effective. We can see within just 10 years, they had representation for women in Congress go from 30% to 63%.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now get some feedback from the judges. Okay. Who wants to start?
I wondered how long it would be before we had Kaminsky in this discussion. Very good. I think your opening statement was very thorough, and I like the way you framed the monarchical New York plan, the Rutledge State Wealth Plan, and then you eventually got to Virginia and New Jersey. I thought that was. I like that framing of that at the convention. I also think it's nice to know very early in your presentation, you told us whether you agreed or disagreed. That's clear, and that's also helpful. I think in the follow-ups, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I didn't want you to go down the path of just powers. I'm sorry, Nora, on that. I wanted you to talk more about the House itself, and I think your understanding of Montesquieu and the homogeneity principle was a point well taken. But I also think your awareness of Madison's well, it almost makes it, your argument is that he was resentful of the fact of local government shafted him. But the fact that you know that there's a gerrymandering problem with him, and at the local levels, there are these demagogues that can take control of things. So I think you demonstrated that you know the history. I would expect you to know the history, so I think you've risen to that expectation quite well. So thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
I'll go on next. I also enjoyed it, and you definitely demonstrated you also demonstrated you know the philosophy, the political philosophy on it, but you also demonstrated you know that something's happening now as well, and you definitely knew what was happening in Lebanon, which I enjoyed, and also always enjoy hearing about a parliamentary system, which would be a fundamental change, but anybody who knows me knows I actually support parliamentary systems. So it's my favorite form of government. But I enjoyed your presentation. I just wish we had a lot more time to hear more from you. It was well done.
Thank you.
I like the beginning. You talked about virtue.
Yep.
And as a foundation. And certainly that was a controversy then. George Washington didn't think that it existed anymore. And I wanted to ask you, to what extent it exists now? You covered a lot of ground. You talked about you were in agreement in part with Madison. You just didn't blanketly say, okay, I totally agree or disagree. So again, showed some thought. I liked your definition. You clearly defined trustees and delegates. And then you touched on a lot of areas here. You even brought in Melanchthon Smith, you brought in Montesquieu, you brought in Puerto Rico, Lebanon. So you covered a lot of ground. And the eagerness to respond to the questions, that was impressive as well. As has been stated, we could have just talked on and on about these issues because they are so crucial today. So very solid job, very good job, and good luck the rest of the way. A round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.